It's often called the eighth wonder of the world. The Great Migration is a show of natural power and instinct. Hundreds of thousands of wildebeest leading the way along a migration route that's been followed out for 1 million years. But it also attracts hundreds of thousands of tourists, and with them, more and more resorts offering front row seats to it all. Today we ask, at what cost?
Can tourism be ethical, or is all tourism exploitative?
Imagine seeing this and thinking, you know what's missing? A 5-star luxury hotel right on top of it.
This construction is an upset to nature. Why? It's literally been built on a path which the wildebeests have been using for migration since millennia.
You can literally see people shooing them back, like forcing them away.
That's why the choices you make as a traveler really matter. Every decision, from the lodge you stay in to the guides you travel with, has a ripple effect on the land, the wildlife, and the local communities who protect them.
Can tourism be ethical, or does our footprint inevitably destroy what should be left alone? Is there a middle ground? I'm Stefanie, Dekker, and welcome to The Stream, where we take digital trends in your online conversations and give them context. Well, to discuss all of this today, we are joined by Dr. Chloe Buiting, a veterinarian and wildlife conservationist, and lawyer and human rights activist, Moses Oleshangay. Joseph, let me start with you. We decided to do this show today because of, the recent headlines once again about a resort being built along a crucial wildebeest migration route. That's currently in court, I understand. What is your reaction to it? How can this happen?
This happens, and because of the backgrounds, the Maasai Mara is a very small reserve in southwestern Kenya, bordering Tanzania. And the basis of the conflict that we are now discussing on the part of Kenya is the construction of the resorts in the wildlife pathways. And this one, so obstructions of either the corridors or the system that the wildlife have been using forever. But at the same time, yes, tourism can be done, but there must be rules. So some of the standards and the rules that has been put already include that there should not be development of more resorts in the Maasai Mara area until 2032. The president of Kenya decided to put some exemptions for the resorts to be constructed.
Absolutely. We reached out to Marriott International, which runs the Ritz-Carlton. We didn't hear back from them. They say that it's not along a migration route, correct? Well, we spoke to Professor Grant Hopcraft. He's been tracking the movement of wildebeest in the region using GPS collars for 26 years. He says the numbers show clear changes in migration patterns.
So why these maps are really important is that they're illustrating the first stage, in other words, a behavioral shift. When we're looking at the corridors, so those red areas, those dark red areas, the lighter red areas, those are the connection between critical resources. And what you see post-2022 is a sudden change in that. In other words, wildebeest have voted unanimously, pretty much, to say, actually, we no longer cross here. We no longer can cross here. I think one of the core issues here surrounding this case in particular is that how this can potentially undermine the value of the sector which you're trying to sell, the tourism value that you're trying to sell. By building these types of infrastructure that preclude animal movement and the free movement of animals and the occupancy of critical landscapes, what we're fundamentally doing is we're saying you can't go to these areas, or you can go, but it's going to be really dangerous. That's what the animal's perception is, that it's dangerous, and that undermines the long-term sustainability of these systems. And I have to say that this is not just the Kenyan situation. This is not just the Ritz-Carlton situation. There's a 783% increase in tourism infrastructure across the board. I think what we're seeing here is sort of the very tip of a very large iceberg.
Chloe, this isn't about just one resort, is it? This is a wider pattern. This is a wider conversation about how we humans are destroying the beauty of the natural world. And Joseph, we're talking about animals. We are going to talk about the local communities as well, just a little later. Chloe, how do we balance? Because I know both of you do say that tourism is important. How do we balance tourism with the wildlife, with the communities? Can that be done?
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Thanks for having me. And yes, in a nutshell, yes, it can absolutely be done, just not like this. And you're right, it's not about this one lodge. It's not about the Ritz-Carlton in particular. This lodge, this case, has become a symbol for what's happening around the world more generally, with increasing pressure on wildlife hotspots with tourism. And the fact that this, ironically, is actually serving to undermine the exact tourism industry that it's seeking to support or showcase. And I will say, on your point, it's not just about the beauty of the natural world necessarily, although that is a key element of it, but it's actually about the processes that keep all of our ecosystems living and thriving and actually sustain life on Earth. So it's a pretty big topic. It's incredibly important. And this pressure in terms of how we can do it, what needs to change, what can be done better, there are a few things, but to start with, I'll back up a little bit further. Any new building should be informed by conservation priorities, in my opinion. It should be conservation first, economic second. They do go hand in hand. But at the moment, what we're seeing is huge, large global investments coming into an ecosystem. And it's that investment that's dictating what the infrastructure is going to be, not the other way around, not what the environment needs or what it can sustain or what the thresholds are for sustainable development. So in my mind, the system is completely backwards. So taking a sort of an approach to any new construction that is what can the landscape hold. Secondly, I think no new builds in wildlife critical areas. That's exactly sort of what's in contention in this case at the moment. It's in a protected area within the Serengeti Mara ecosystem. And there are different tiers of protection within that ecosystem. There's, of course, the high migration zone tier, which is what is being claimed. This is in the courts. Will later decide if that's the case or not. But no new builds within a high wildlife migration zone, because that fundamentally disrupts these critically important processes to the ecosystem. And then potentially having something like, tiered structures of, it's about alleviating pressure from these systems that are already under huge threat. So it's probably a much bigger topic than the scope of today, but it can be done well. Tourism is conservation's friend. It's just when the priorities are backwards that things start to go a little bit wobbly.
Money, of course, being a major incentive, isn't it? And there's so many layers also to this. But I want to play a clip that went viral last year, caused a huge outcry when you talk about the pressure on the natural world. Now, it shows people pushing the migrating wildebeest away from a hotel.
Oh, no. No. Look. No. No. I tell you, they should never allow this camp here on the crossing side.
Joseph, I'm sure you've seen that. Everyone saw it. It caused a mass outcry at the time. The government responded. There was more, the wildlife rangers responded. What is your reaction to that? You're a Maasai. Just explain to people that look at that. Yes, we all find it terrible. This is your land. Like, what does this mean? Where have we gotten to if you look at something like that?
We got many things wrong, and that's why we're here. And as you said rightly, and actually as also the video previously shown, this land, particularly you are referring to Maasai Serengeti, is the land that the Maasai and the wildlife shaped for many generations, for many centuries. The problem with the idea of tourism and actually conservation by extension, particularly in countries like Tanzania that I'm from, which also goes to Kenya, is that they believe tourism is synonymous to conservation. So it must happen in all levels without limit, which is wrong because it's a different discipline that actually the places that people start to visit that we call destination change because there were people's home initially, then change into tourist playgrounds. Then we see what we have seen in the video. So you go to Ngorongoro, people are being displaced, for example, because of tourism, but they call it conservation. You have seen, for example, in the hotel, that is a blockade of the person, is a very right example of the blockade of the pathway for the wildlife because of people's business. And which I said earlier, we can, this world, the land provide enough of what human need. But of course, it cannot provide beyond or enough of what greedy requires. So it cannot provide to the extent that it satisfies the greediness. But if it is the ordinary thing that we need, the land can provide. So we can avoid, for example, blocking the pathways, the routes. We can stop displacing people who knows how to shape the landscape. You have seen, for example, not only that video, I believe as human, we have private life. Animals also request them. So whether the animals are hunting or mating or doing anything, then it becomes the hotspot of the jeep running into like a hell of it. I'm sure they're not happy. They don't just have a way to explain that it's not right to do this, but it's not.
Yeah, I think
so we need to change. So
yeah.
Not only the leads, not only the Kenya, including Tanzania.
I think in that initial clip we stayed before we started our conversation, you saw the tourists coming around the cheetah that was eating its prey, right? Chloe, this brings me perfectly to what I wanted to ask you. How does our footprint, the tourist footprint, affect, vehicles, resorts, helicopters? How does it affect wildlife? And how much impact has it had on the areas that you are working in?
Yeah, I mean, hugely significantly. I mean, again, there's a way to do it well and a way that it's done badly, which is most often the case. And in my opinion, certainly here in the Serengeti. So let's look at this particular geography. The Serengeti Mara ecosystem is like an island, a conservation island within sort of human architecture all around it. So it's already an ecosystem under stress that has sort of artificial walls around it, if you will. And these corridors within this ecosystem are not sort of pathways per se. They exist because landscape isn't equally passable, and they're not lines on a map. They're time critical windows where animals can access food, water, have shelter, survival. And so these animals aren't migrating because they want to, they're migrating because they have to, and they're already operating on razor thin margins. And this particular crossing at the river is one of the biggest crossings from the Serengeti in Tanzania up into the Mara in Kenya. So how do the animals respond to our presence? Other than increased stress, there's immediate behavioural and physiological changes. And the good thing about this is, if you could even call it that, this can be measured. So where do wildebeest start reacting to human presence? And recent data has shown that it's within a 6 kilometre radius. So anywhere within 6 kilometres of human infrastructure, so
Chloe,
buildings,
let me quickly
lodges.
just jump in there. I want to ask you, for someone that says, well, there's a resort, but why don't the wildebeest just go around it? Doesn't work that way, does it?
Yeah, Steph, I totally get why they say that. It doesn't work that way because animals don't re-optimize overnight, number one. And number two, they follow inherited spatial memory. So they can't just go, whoops, there's a lodge there, I'll just trot around it. They're already operating on this razor-thin margin where any sort of detour isn't an inconvenience, it's a physiological tax where it might lead to starvation. They don't have enough water, they don't have supplies, or they're forced into a more predator-rich area. So what happens then? That leads to population fragmentation and eventually collapse. What builds a resilient ecosystem is where there are lots of different components where if one crisis happens, like increase in predators or human activity, there's places to adapt and escape to. And what we're doing right now with all of the presence of humans within protected areas, mind you, we're pushing the animals outside of the protected areas, which sort of fundamentally goes against why the areas are protected in the first place. So no, they can't just go around, it's embedded within them, and they don't actually have the physiological margins to go around. They're operating on, on the brink of starvation at any one point in time.
Well, we've been talking about the animals, but what about the people? Many Maasai are also being forced off their lands due to tourism resorts, and often the argument is national parks. Now, for context, the Maasai are an indigenous community. They primarily live in southern Kenya and northern Tanzania and have coexisted with wildlife for generations.
International pressure has to be put, public pressure has to be put on these developers to get out of the Mara, to pay back what they have already taken away from these communities, and to repair the environmental damage that they've already caused. Indigenous people have taken care of and sustained these lands for millennia. That is how come we can enjoy witnessing one of the greatest wonders of the world in the Great Migration, a delicate balance of nature, coming to disrupt it by building a garish hotel in the middle of the San River. It is unbelievable.
Joseph, do you think tourists know? You know, everybody goes to Kenya or to Tanzania and has pictures with the Maasai. Do they know what is happening to the Maasai? They're being forced off their lands. I mean, I actually tried to do a story about it once in Tanzania. I wasn't given a visa to try and shed a light to what is happening.
One which is very true, majority of them do not know, so to say. And I'm referring to an individual tourist, not the tour operator, because they are too. And I have personally bothered to ask some of the tourists last year, who I happened to meet them with a friend, and they said they are going to Ngorongoro. Ngorongoro is my home place. And I asked, what do you know about Ngorongoro? And they responded. It was so funny and terrifying at the same time, because he told me he was an Italian person. He said, oh, I know Mufasa, King Lion, which is seen in the documentary. Then hardly mentioned the Maasai. So if he cannot even understand, then it's even difficult to know what is really happening to the life of the people. So I think one of the things that the individual tourists need to know is to learn not only about the beauty, the exotic that they have been told, but the fact that there are human beings with rights, and all the happening in their environment, who actually shaped the land into the way it is. It is not right that someone has to build the empire at the expense of other people's life.
Well, there is long-standing, a lot of conversation about conservation and conservationists also being quite colonial in its past, right? About the land. I want to bring in another guest now, so much to talk about. That's Dr. Gladys Kalema-Zikusoka. She's the founder of Conservation Through Public Health, and she's in Entebbe in Uganda. Gladys, thank you. You've been listening to our conversation. We've been talking about the importance of communities. How important in your work would you say the local communities are when it comes to conservation, and when it comes to being part of the benefit, if you will, of what's happening when it comes to these sort of tourist infrastructures?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me onto the program. It's really interesting to hear what everybody has had to say. I would say that I have worked in Buiting Impenetrable National Park for over 30 years. I first went there as a vet student, and I went there when gorilla tourism had just begun. And before gorilla tourism began, it was just a forest that people used to cut, and there was no benefits. And if tourism hadn't begun, the gorillas would no longer be there because the forest was rapidly disappearing. What really struck me as a vet student is most of the people who were hired to work in the park used to be hunters or poachers, and we used to call them born-again poachers because they were earning more money protecting the wildlife rather than killing it. So this was a very good experience for me as a vet student in conservation medicine. And it has continued. When we founded Conservation Through Public Health, based on experiences I had working as a first veterinarian for the Uganda Wildlife Authority, and I was hired because gorilla tourism had begun, and they were concerned that tourists would make gorillas sick, with a fatal flu such as COVID-19. So when I was hired, actually, the first thing that made the gorillas sick was not the tourists, the first people, but the local communities. And it's all because once you habituate the animals, they start to go outside where they used to range before tourism began, before their forest habitat was cut. They came in touch with dirty clothing, picked up scabies, and it spread through the group. We lost the baby gorilla, and the others only recovered with ivermectin treatment. A few years later, we decided to found Conservation Through Public Health to improve the health of the people and the gorillas together.
This is key, isn't it? I think I've done a lot of stories in the field on conservation and how I did the gorillas in Rwanda, how expensive that is for tourists to go, but that money is filtering through to the communities. And you were talking there about poachers turned rangers. That is the way it has to work, right? People need to benefit from their own land and not just watch the money going to, as Joseph was saying, greed, foreign corporations. That is not, it needs to be an ecosystem that goes hand in hand, right? Gladys, how important is it for the local communities to feel that they are benefiting from the monetization that has happened of what has always been their land and the animals around them, right? So often they have not benefited. I did a story from the gorillas in Rwanda in Virunga National Park where that money is filtering through, and it's a success story because they're involved. And you mentioned, right, the poachers turned rangers. Once people see that they're actually being respected, their land is being respected, they're benefiting from protecting it. That's the only way forward, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. We found that in Buiting, the communities are very positive about conservation, and now they can't live without the gorillas. But there is also a downside to tourism. If it's too much, then everybody suffers. And for example, I've written a book called Walking with Gorillas, and there's a chapter in here, Is Tourism a Necessary Evil? We did find that the only gorilla subspecies whose numbers is growing are those where there's tourism, which is the mountain gorillas. Whereas tourists come to visit the mountain gorillas, they can also make them sick. They can give them diseases because we're so closely related. We share 98.4% genetic material. And so that's an issue. People want to get close. They want selfies. It's another kind of distraction. People want a very intimate experience with gorillas to interact so closely. And this can put them at risk from diseases. But at the same time, we always tell tourists, you have to be careful. Everyone now has to wear a mask since the pandemic. We did find that flu reduced in the gorillas during the pandemic when people had to put on masks, and this has continued beyond the pandemic. But another thing that we tell people is that they must make sure they visit communities. It's not enough to just come and see the gorillas and go home. You should at least hire a porter or buy a craft or visit the local communities because once a local community member meets a tourist, they're much less likely to poach.
I've just been told that we've run out of time on the show. Just briefly, Joseph, from you, can we save, with so much to talk about, can we save what we have left?
Yes, we can. And we can by going back to sense. And that is not thinking about monetization of everything. So we should not conserve because there is money. We should do this because we have morality to do this. But second, we should try to limit as possible occupation by tourism. We Maasai, for example, my father said, was evicted so that the land is occupied by the tourists. Tomorrow, and I'm referring 10, our president will receive a report that is likely to say, I will be taken out of Ngorongoro to be occupied by the business. We should say we cannot agree on the investment that has not regard for human right, that has not regard for human life, that has not regard for ecology and wildlife preservation. So how can we do this? Is bringing down the management and affairs of these areas into the people who feel the pinch of what happens, who interact with the wildlife all the days, and who actually know, not be told from the university how the gorilla is, how the elephant is. They know from their own upbringing or through. It is very possible. We just need to respect the rules, respect the law, and particularly understand no human is disposable. And animals should be allowed to move in a free range that they always doing. I think this is very possible if we go back to sense.
Absolutely, very challenging indeed, though, because of course, I'm sorry, we're out of time, Joseph. I'm really sorry. I've been told to wrap, and we could keep talking about this for hours. Such an important topic, our natural world, the people, the animals, everything. We really do have to do more to conserve it and protect it, right? Thank you all so much for coming on the stream. And thank you for watching from me and the entire fantastic stream team. I'll see you soon.